Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today is September 6th, 2020. And if you're a student, I hope that you are adjusting to being in class virtually and distance learning. For parents, I pray that you're also being able to adjust and manage having kids at home and still trying to get work done. I know it's difficult, but this is what we have for now. There are some people who will walk into a room and expect to be treated like a VIP, right? A very important person. And I'm sure you know one or two of these VIPs, and they just somehow think that they are better than other people, like better than us mere mortals, us normals, right? They think that being a VIP, right, that their voice carries more weight, or that everyone wants to hear what they have to say. And what they do just seems to matter a little more than what everyone else does. Right? A VIP. Think for a second, maybe you know one or two VIPs. Yeah, even among Christians, some act like they are God's gift to the church. They act like they are spiritual VIPs. They have a sense of self-importance, an inflated sense of self-worth. Everything and everyone revolves around them, right? And so if us mere mortals, we are just planets and asteroids, these VIPs, they are the stars. They are the stars of the show. And of course, they would never label it pride or arrogance. I mean, that would be ungodly, right? But to everyone else, they're the same. Spiritual VIPs. Are you, or do you know, a spiritual VIP? I have to caution myself. I need to look at myself quite often and ask myself, do I consider myself a spiritual VIP? Last week in Esther chapter 5, we were looking at this contrast in actions of Esther and Haman. Right? Esther humbly, as a servant, she humbly risked her life to save her people. And Haman, on the other hand, he arrogantly and childishly made plans to kill Mordecai, because Mordecai would not bow to him. Mordecai would not honor him as this VIP that he thought he was, that he believed he was. Haman thought of himself as a VIP, a very important person. In today's chapter, we will see Haman humiliated. The proud are humbled by God. And so Haman is humiliated by God, the one who ought to be the true VIP of our lives, of our stories. It's God. And so let's take a look at Esther chapter 6 together. Verse 1 and 2. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So when we last left off, Esther, if you might remember from last week, Esther had invited the king to a feast and asked that he return the next day, the next evening, and hear her request. And so this is what happens right afterwards. For some strange reason, you might want to call it coincidence or providence, whatever, the king could not sleep. The king could not sleep. The night after that first feast, the king could not sleep. Now there are a few other instances in the Bible of kings or of characters who have trouble sleeping because God is trying to reveal something to them. Sometimes it's through a dream, or sometimes it's an angel visiting them and telling them something. So there's this precedent, this biblical precedent of characters who have trouble sleeping. Right? They have trouble sleeping. And in our case today, King Ahasuerus, right, he cannot sleep. And so he's having this restless night. And so he asks to be read a book of memorable deeds, the book of the Chronicles. Right? It's basically a history textbook. And anything that memorable that may have happened in the empire, or kind of like catching up on the news and stuff like that. And so, I mean, if anything's going to put you to sleep, it's going to be history textbook, right? It's going to bore you to sleep, and it's just, so this is what he wants, right? And you got to imagine that this book of Chronicles is quite long. It's history. It's the history of their empire, of their kingdom, right? And again, somehow, just by coincidence or providence, they just happen to read the part where his life had been saved by Mordecai. How Mordecai had foiled an assassination attempt on King Ahasuerus' life. And out of all the history of the entire empire, they just happened to read this one thing, right? This had happened years ago. And earlier we did cover Esther chapter 2, but we skipped over this part. And so it's worthwhile to go back and take a look at it. In Esther chapter 2. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Okay, so this is what happened back in chapter 2. And we're back in chapter 6 now. And he hears this account read to him, and he remembers it. He's like, oh yeah, I do remember that. Somehow he must have forgotten it, or he got busy with other things, but now he remembers it. Right? So let's continue on in chapter 6, verse 3. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So the king says, oh, I need to do something about this. I need to reward him for this. He saved my life. Right? And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So here we have Haman. He's entering the court. And for those who may have forgotten, verse 4 reminds us of what happened last week. And Haman had intended to get permission from the king, right, to hang Mordecai, right, upon this gallows that he had just built. He had built this really, really tall, this huge gallows, 50 cubits high. And he's like, I want to hang Mordecai on this thing. And although the edict to kill the Jews was still stood, and the day was coming, remember, Haman could not wait. Like Haman could not wait for that day, and he was impatient, and he wanted to do it today. Right? I want to kill Mordecai today. And that's why he went in to see the king. This is why he goes in to see the king. And the king doesn't know about any of this. Right? All he knows is that one of his top advisors has come in, and now the king wants to get advice. The king wants to get advice on how to honor Mordecai. And so he says, what should be done to the man who the king delights to honor? So it's obvious to us as the readers that the king is referring to Mordecai, right? But Haman, he doesn't know this. Haman, he's this, he ever the VIP. He's this narcissistic guy, right? He thinks that the king is talking about him. Right? I mean, obviously, look at what Haman says to himself. Right? Whom would the king delight to honor more than me? I'm the most honorable person there is. I mean, who else would the king want to honor besides me? I mean, Haman, he cannot fathom a world in which anyone else gets attention, let alone glory. And so obviously he thinks the king is talking about him. Right? The king is referring to him. I was trying to think, has something like this ever happened to me? Some kind of a misunderstanding, and the closest thing that I can think of is when you're walking towards someone and they wave, and you think that they're waving at you, right? And you walk a little closer, and you're finally able to talk to them or whatever, and then you find out, oh wait, they weren't trying to wave at me; they were trying to wave at the person behind me, right? Ooh, I mean, it's like super embarrassing, and all you can do is you just play it cool, like yeah. Well, imagine a situation like that, right? But 1,000 times worse. It's 1,000 times more embarrassing and more humiliating. I mean, Haman thinks that the king is asking Haman what he wants, how he wants to be honored, and Haman thinks this way very naturally because he thinks everything is about him. Haman thinks that everything is about him. I mean, who else could there be? Who else is more honorable than me? Verse 7 continues. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal robes be brought which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor. Let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So here we see Haman's greatest wish and desire is to be paraded around the city and celebrated with pomp and circumstance. And you look at it, he wants to wear the king's own robes, right? The emperor's clothes, literally. And then he wants to ride the king's horse, right? The most magnificent horse in the entire kingdom. Right? And then and he wants to wear the royal crown. I mean, Haman basically wants to be honored as the king and publicly identified as the man whom the king delights to honor. Right? This is the VIP. Everyone, take a look at the VIP, the man whom the king delights to honor. I mean, this is as close to royalty as Haman can get. I mean, he's already second in command. He's already got the king's authority. Now, Haman wants to appear like this king. Right? If even only for a day, he wants to feel like royalty. He wants to be like the king. And this whole scenario This reminds me of when God created man and woman. In the beginning, when God created man and woman, and he gave them everything, right? He gave them everything. He gave them this beautiful sanctuary to steward, paradise. And he gave them this intimate relationship and communion with himself, with the Creator himself. Man and woman, Adam and Eve, had this intimate, close relationship. Right? They had everything. And still that was not enough. Right? Adam and Eve, they wanted to be like God. They wanted to be like God. I mean, the sin of Haman began in the beginning. It began with our first parents. These are the sins of pride, of idolatry, of covetousness. And we today, myself included, we bear these sins as well. Those sins are in us, alive and kicking as well. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai, and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Well, here it is. Can you imagine how humiliated Haman must have been? He thought that he was going to be the one sitting on top of the king's horse being paraded around town. Now he is this guy, one of the king's most noble officials, dressing his enemy, exalting him, proclaiming his greatness. Right? Haman is this guy. He's not the recipient of this attention. He is the one who must give it. And can you imagine this scene? It's funny for us as readers. I mean, we saw this coming a mile away. But it's not so funny for Haman. His pride had blinded him to this possibility. But as readers, we also don't really know, if we're reading this for the first time, we don't really know how this is going to play out. What Haman is going to do. We should be a little scared. I mean, we've seen Haman react and overreact to situations in very extreme ways. I mean, we've seen him unhinged before. You remember the last time that Mordecai simply defied him. Right? Haman successfully passed a law to commit genocide, to kill all the Jews. That's an overreaction. And so, now we as the readers, we must ask, what will happen now when Mordecai humiliates Haman? Is he going to do something worse? What else worse could be done, right? I mean, we as readers are to feel this tension. Verse 12, Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, where he had been, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared, the second feast on the second night. And so this is the end of the chapter, and it is written in this very extremely ironic way. Haman is now the king that he always wanted to be. Right? He's the king of fools, basically. Right? And his wise men, it says, his wise men, his friends, right? These counselors, they come to consult with him. And they give him this prophecy. Right? It's supposed to be very funny. This prophecy, they say, is something that he really doesn't want to hear. Right? If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Right? This is not what he wants to hear right now. And even his wise men, they recognize that all these little coincidences, all these things that are happening, they're adding up. You know what? This must be the work of someone greater, of some higher power. Right? They realize, I don't think you're going to win this one, Haman. Right? You're not just fighting Mordecai. You are fighting the God of the Jews. Right? The God of the Jews will not let his people, the Jews, be destroyed. This God is not going to let this happen. And he hears this from his wise men, his friends, his counselors, his wife. Right? And we see Haman just utterly ashamed. He's too ashamed to be in public. He's ashamed to show his face. He is just completely and utterly humiliated and ashamed. And this is the very same shame that Adam and Eve must have felt when they were confronted with their sin. When they had gone behind the king's back and done something against the king's law. And they felt that guilt and that shame and that humiliation, which we know all too well. And this reminds us, when we raise ourselves up as more important, or as spiritual VIPs, God will find a way to humble us, because he desires glory. Because God deserves glory. And because he loves us. Because he loves us too much to be full of ourselves. God loves us so much that he will humble, he will discipline us. He will not let us be so full of ourselves. And the moral of this story is not just, ha ha, look at Haman eat crow. That's not really the main point of this story. This story is a call for us to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, how have I raised myself up? How have I thought of myself as more important than others? How have I assumed that God's blessings were for me to enjoy, to bask in? And this is also a very sobering reminder that we all, as sinners, we want to be like God. We want to be like God in some sense. We want to be recognized. We want to be celebrated. We want to be worshipped. You know, our Lord Jesus taught us this. Now Jesus, told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. So Jesus is teaching us, and I think this message in Esther 6 is reminding us to rethink. Maybe we are not the one whom the king delights to honor. Maybe we are not the spiritual VIPs that we think we are. And regardless of how long we've been a believer, our status in the church, how much we do for God, maybe, as Jesus says, maybe we ought to see that it is an honor just to be invited in the first place. And maybe we should cultivate this attitude, which Paul writes about in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Count others more significant than yourselves. You know, brothers and sisters, although I am your pastor, I need to remind myself of this all the time, that I am not more significant than you. I am not more spiritual than you. Yeah, I may know a little bit more about theology and the Bible and stuff, but that does not mean I am more righteous or more obedient or more devoted or more committed to our God. I am not more significant than you. I have to tell myself all the time to be a good listener, because I am convinced that you have something important to say, and I don't have all the answers. I don't see all the perspectives, because I am not more significant than you, more important than you. I am not a very important person in the church. Right? You know, every once in a while, actually, more often than not, I find myself being more like Haman than Christ. I catch myself being proud and arrogant and assuming and stubborn, thinking I know the right way, wanting to be like God. You know, and in God's grace, sometimes, oftentimes, God will allow me to eat humble pie and remind me that He is the real VIP. Not me, He. God is the VIP of my life, of our church, of this world. God is the VIP. We must not count ourselves more significant than others, than God. So, brothers and sisters, humble yourselves before Him. Do not presume too much. Lift up those around you. Don't just be blessed. Be a blessing. Lift up those around you. Don't just be blessed. Be a blessing. Okay. Take care, everybody. We will see you soon. I have an announcement that I sent out over the email. If you have time today, please follow the instructions of the announcement. Our church has done something significant, which I hope that you will be a part of. So take a look at your email or our Facebook group. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. We are here to serve you. I am not more significant than you. I am not more important than you. Okay? God bless you.